In today's video, we have a variety of NHL news and rumor updates with information coming from the latest TSN Insider Trading segment, plus some more tidbits from Elliotte Friedman's 31 Thoughts blog, and we have a very interesting development in the Dustin Byfuglien Winnipeg Jets situation. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumor updates for today, and I want to kick things off by discussing a little further here with the Dustin Byfuglien situation with the Winnipeg Jets. Now, as we know, this situation has been kind of lingering on since training camp opened. Dustin Byfuglien came to training camp, did not report to camp though, and basically told the Jets that he wanted a leave of absence, and his future has seemed relatively uncertain. There's been reports that he's going to return. We've seen other reports indicating he was likely retiring. It has really been all over the place depending on the source of the news or information. And now we have a different twist on the story here, finding out yesterday that Dustin Byfuglien has indeed had surgery on his ankle that's been giving him a lot of trouble dating back to last season. And it's now believed that that's the main reason why he didn't want to report to training camp. He was still having a lot of issues with his ankle. But I just can't help but wonder why he wouldn't report to camp, show them that he's still injured, and end up on injury reserve. At least if he's on injured reserve or long-term injury reserve, he'd still be getting paid instead of being suspended without pay. So I can't help but wonder if this surgery is going to have to cause a change in how things are listed for his contract with the Jets, if it could result in him actually having to go on IR and getting paid instead of being suspended without pay, or how that's all going to work out. Perhaps he wasn't sure of the surgery before, and since he's been suspended without pay, it was, maybe he went to have the surgery in order to get himself back collecting a paycheck again. I really don't know how this is going to change things, but it's certainly an interesting development for sure. Now, according to Darren Dreger on Twitter, who just put this out in a matter of a few minutes before I sat down to record here, that the estimated recovery time for Byfuglien's surgery is approximately 4 months. But that's just approximately. You just never know exactly how these things are going to heal. And this really does not give us any further indication if Dustin Byfuglien is going to return or not return. It really doesn't clarify things a whole lot further, because all we know is that he ended up having surgery and is going to need that kind of time to recover. So obviously 4 months, if you count the calendar here, goes through November, December, January, February. Probably if he did return, we're looking at like a March to April type of deal. He obviously would need time to get back in shape, get some training under his belt. It's obviously having ankle surgery. He's not going to be able to do a lot of other cardio type of training while he's recovering. Could he possibly return for a playoff run? I guess it is possible, but I guess if he did return, that's probably what we're looking at. So for the Winnipeg Jets, obviously this has a lot of implications on their salary cap, because they've been looking to make some moves. Been lots of talk. They want to do some changes to that blue line. That's desperately looking different compared to last year, but they really can't do much until they have further clarity on Byfuglien's contract and how it's going to impact their overall cap situation. So I guess we will see if we get any further updates here, but I guess for right now, we know that if Byfuglien does return, it's likely would only be at the end of the year or into the playoffs because of the ankle surgery, and we'll await further updates to see if we can get any more clarity on what his intentions are once he's healed. Now we have some other information, like I said, combination of Elliotte Friedman's 31 Thoughts blog as well as TSN Insider Trading. First off, I want to touch on the Buffalo Sabres. Now, the Sabres are having a pretty good start to the season. We saw this happen last year as well, and things ultimately did change throughout the year, and they ended up, finishing not where they were hoping to be and out of the playoffs one more time. Now, of course, the Sabres are hoping to have a different fate this year, and it seems as though many within the organization believe that they have more depth and a better team, and that's not going to happen this year. I guess only time will tell. But in the interim, they do have some extra players, and they are tight up against the cap. Now, they recently got Colin Miller back on the blue line. Brandon Montour is not too far away from returning, so they're certainly going to be in a situation to bring Montour back onto the roster that they're going to have to make some other moves. Now, there's been plenty of talk about them trading a defenseman, and now there's some talk about them maybe moving a forward as well, because they do have some guys that are not getting a whole lot of playing time, and that includes Evan Rodriguez, who's in the final year of his contract where he's earning $2 million. He's only played in 6 games, seen limited ice time. Things are not really working out this year between Rodriguez and the Sabres, so it's looking like he probably wouldn't mind an opportunity to play more, and he might have to go elsewhere in order to get that. So back to the blue line here momentarily. Obviously, like I said, for Montour to come back, they need to make some moves. There's been a lot of talk about maybe Marco Scandella being the ultimate player who ends up getting traded, since Ristolainen appears to be happy, willing to stay. Scandella's down to the final year of his contract, so he's a pending UFA. may not be returning to the Sabres next year based on their overall blue line, so it would kind of make sense. But at the same time, when you're off to a hot start, you're not really under any pressure to make moves until Montour returns, because then they're in a salary cap predicament where to get Montour back playing, somebody's got to go. And of course, with Rodriguez making $2 million, that would certainly be a big help. So perhaps we could see them go down the route of trading a forward rather than a defenseman. Obviously, they would want to have lots of depth on defense on the blue line for a playoff run. If that's going to happen, you often need 7 or 8 or more defensemen. Sometimes you end up with a lot of injuries and whatnot. So clearly the Sabres are not in a big rush here, and Rodriguez could actually end up being the guy to go to help clear some space to bring Brandon Montour back. So I guess let me know what your thoughts are, especially if you're a Sabres fan. What kind of moves would you do? Do you think Rodriguez is the odd man out in the forward group? And do you think Scandella makes sense to move on a blue line? Or would you hold off making any blue line moves and try to tinker with the roster in a different way to get Montour back in action here? Now, speaking of teams that have some blue liners with some question marks, let's jump over to the Calgary Flames. Now, before the season even get underway, throughout the offseason when they were trying to get all their RFA contracts, like Matthew Tkachuk, all in order, there's been a lot of talk that they're going to end up moving a defenseman, and the two names that came up are Brody and Hamonic. Now, of course, Brody was always kind of looked upon as being the more likely to go. Both of them are pending unrestricted free agents, and we still could possibly end up seeing that happen, but I think it's really going to depend on how the Flames season go. I don't think they've had such a good start that they were hoping to, so depending on how things are later in the year could certainly, make an impact on what their decisions are. But ultimately, Travis Hamonic and his agent did have some negotiations with the Flames on an extension during the offseason, but obviously they did not get a deal done, and now it's being reported that Hamonic would prefer not to negotiate in season. He wants to let that be till the end of the year, so clearly he's not going to be looking for an extension till that time. So that leaves them to possibly turn to TJ Brody. I think they'd like to bring one of them back. I'm not sure they'll bring both back for next year, but ultimately going into the year, right before camp with the injury to Valimaki certainly changed things a bit. They bought out Michael Stone and then in turn brought him back, and it certainly complicated things quite a bit. But if the Flames continue to struggle, or depending on how contract negotiations go, it is possible we could still see him move on the blue line, but I think it's more likely to happen later in the year once they have a better indication on how their season's going to be, if they're going to play a playoff team, once, hopefully get Valimaki back in their lineup and kind of go from there. But the Flames are still a team looking to clear a little bit of space, and there's still some talk around Michael Frolik as well. There's, obviously I think he might be the odd forward to possibly be moved if they decide to want to clear some space, but I guess we'll see how things go. They certainly have some time to make some decisions here. Now let's jump over here and take a quick look at the Toronto Maple Leafs. Of course, they have some pending salary cap issues that we've been talking about, where when Hyman and Dermott are both back, they had to clear some roster space and cap space to make that happen. Dermott's now returned. Hyman appears to still be a couple of weeks away. The recovery time for his injury is right around the 6-month mark, which puts us right about now. So he is technically on schedule, but is going to need a little bit more time. Likely going to be another week or two. They just said, not sure exactly, but TSN insiders are saying probably a few weeks at most for him to return. Whereas John Tavares could end up possibly be returning from his broken finger as early as this weekend. If he's not quite ready to go on the weekend, then probably sometime early next week in one of their games that they have coming up here on the schedule. So Tavares won't be long, where Hyman's still going to likely be another week or two. Obviously, at this point, Tavares returning will have no implications on his salary cap, but when Hyman is ready to return, if you take a look at the players that they would likely be looking to move off the roster to make the space, it is going to take up to 3 players to make the necessary cap space to get Hyman's contract on the active roster. In yesterday's video, we talked about the fact that Elliot Friedman mentioned in his latest blog that Martin Marincin would be a player that they would be okay moving. But then, of course, in their latest game, we had an injury to Jake Muzzin versus the Washington Capitals. That very well could change things a little bit. Of course, we don't know a lot of details yet on the longer-term implications of the Muzzin injury and if he's going to be out, how long, or any of those things just yet. So I guess we'll wait to see. But I don't think the Leafs are going to be making any quick moves here, with Hyman likely being another week or two before he returns. That's certainly going to buy them some time, see how Muzzin recovers before they make any rash moves. But Marincin certainly is a potential player that could go, along with guys like Gravel, Patan, maybe even Jason Spezza. It's hard to say. His relationship and how his usage with Babcock's been kind of up and down throughout the year. So it's difficult to say. We could see some players on waivers, and we very well could see a trade. But, at this point, Dubas doesn't have to rush. He likely still has a couple of weeks before Hyman comes back, and he has to make a decision. Now, one of the players we've been talking about since the beginning of training camp to watch as a potential trade target would be LA Kings winger Tyler Toffoli, who's entering the final year of his contract with the LA Kings. And at this point, we are not aware of any contract extension talks between himself and the Kings organization. Of course, he's had a pretty good run as a decent player in his career. Has been part of the Kings championship run a few years back when they were a little bit more solid, winning more games. Of course, Tyler Toffoli's had a pretty solid start to his NHL career. He was a proven NHL goal scorer. Last year or so hasn't been as good for him, but at the same time, the team hasn't been as good either. And you can't help but wonder if he's in a different scenario, playing with a different group of players, that maybe he'd have a different outcome. And possibly he could, like I said, he could end up being on the move later this year. Now, one thing that's kind of sparked a little bit more interest in possible trade talks would be the fact that he was actually a healthy scratch this past week, which is something that you don't normally see for Toffoli. So far this season, Toffoli's put up 5 points in 12 games. Not a great stat, but still not as worse as some of the other players around the league for sure. But Toffoli's a player who I think could very well find himself on the move. Now, one thing that many people found interesting is that Senators GM Pierre Dorion was in attendance scouting that game of the LA Kings. And of course, as we know, there's been a lot of talk around the Senators wanting to add a scoring forward to their lineup. As much as they're rebuilding, they would like to have a little bit more experience and a little bit more scoring power up front to try to win some more games, be more competitive. And they just want to give their younger prospects a little bit more time for seasoning before they take on a bigger role. And like I said, the likelihood of them acquiring another player who they feel like they might be able to rehabilitate, like an Anthony Duclair or Vladislav Nemestikov, would make a lot of sense. So it's obviously going to depend on the price tag. I don't think they're going to be prepared to give up too much of an asking price or really part with any of their promising prospects or a first round pick or anything of that nature. But if they can get a player for the right deal, a guy like Toffoli very well might make a lot of sense. So I guess we'll see between the relationship here between Toffoli and the Kings. But when you're a healthy scratch, that certainly is a wake-up call. We'll see if he plays better when he gets back in the lineup and if he could find himself on the move. And maybe a team like Ottawa could be his landing destination once that actually does take place. Now, I also want to quickly touch on the Pittsburgh Penguins. Of course, with their recent moves, they do have a little bit more flexibility with their salary cap situation. And ever since we saw that, there's been a little bit more of a talk about what they might be looking to add. They might be looking to add another forward. Been lots of talk around that this year because of all the injuries that they've had. But at the same time, they very well could end up using some of that space to sign defenseman Marcus Pettersson to a longer-term contract. Now, he was an RFA this past offseason. Coming into the season, Rutherford made it known that he was very interested in signing Pettersson to a longer-term deal. They feel he fits in pretty well on their defense scorer. They feel he's a solid top four defenseman who can play with them, and they'd like to keep in their organization for an extended time. So obviously at this point, he's likely not going to cost too much money to get locked up. So they very well could end up using some of that space in order to get him signed to a longer-term contract. So I would not be surprised to see that take place. But with Pettersson signed a 1-year contract, he can't officially sign an extension until after January the 1st. So that would likely come in the second half of the season. Of course, the Penguins are also believed to be very interested in moving a goaltender between Tristan Jarry and Casey DeSmith. I would be surprised if one of those two was not moved before the deadline as well, and they could use that extra space to maybe acquire some more scoring or possibly get a forward back in return in a trade for one of those two goaltenders. So I do believe Jim Rutherford will still continue to be busy here between locking up Pettersson and adding something extra to his roster before we get too late into the season. Of course, the Penguins are off to a pretty decent start this year, but I think as the season goes on, we're going to see that Metro Division be quite a dogfight to get to those playoff spots. So I don't think Rutherford's going to be waiting too long. He's typically a pretty aggressive GM to get what he feels his team needs in order to make sure they have an excellent shot at making the playoffs and going on another run. Let us know your latest news updates for today. Of course, as always, we'll know your thoughts, your opinions, and everything we discussed down in the comment section. Let me know what your thoughts are, and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.